What's up, guys? This is Andy BC Builds. I apologize for this Greywash video not loading the first time. Part 2 loaded fine, but part 1 it would upload and then it would be taken down. It kept saying the file was too large, even though it really wasn't. It was a longer video, but I've put longer up there, so I'm not sure why. And then I tried to make this again at work and it did the same thing. So I'm just going to try to zip through this all quickly. This is how to set up Greywash, and if I can only get, I'm not sure if I'm going to run out of memory either. So if I don't get to finish it all in this video, I'll upload this video and I'll make another one. So sorry, numbers don't line up. This is how I set up my Greywash. You'll notice I already have all the cups set up. Okay, I'm missing two, but anyways, in this, as it's set up now, how I'll show you to set it up now, I have 8 cups in each row. I have 2 rows of 8, which I'll explain. You'll see as I'm going along. And when it comes to the ink you choose for Greywash, it's really your preference as long as you use a reputable brand or something you know. Me personally, lately, I either use the Bob Tyrell kit. It's only 3 bottles. I use that for smaller tattoos that I'm not really going to add on to and I know I'm not going to have to touch up. But when I'm doing big tattoos like a sleeve and I do like half sleeve and I got to finish the next, it's better to use the whole pre-mix set just so you can match the tones a little easier and be more precise. You want to kind of have the tones cohesive between the top and the bottom of the sleeve. That's why, or if I know I'm going to have to go back in and touch something up, it's easy to know what tone I'm using, given I dip in and out. So anyways, the brand I'm using primarily for bigger tattoos, because it's already pre-mixed, is this. It's Southeast Tattoo Supply. This is a relatively unknown brand. Jeff Ned sent this to me, and I'm not sure. I just found out today. I was looking at my uploads. The review for this, which I did, was an hour and a half long. I think it won't upload either, so I have to redo this. But I actually have since ordered a couple, enough of this to do a couple Greywash sets. I spent, a good bit of money on this. I like this because it mixes down well with distilled water, glycerin, or witch hazel, and it really allows you to get those light tones. And it just heals well and it sinks well and it's a perfect dark liner and it's really good for Greywash. I'm not going to get into that. This is pretty much an empty bottle. This is the one he sent me. I've used the shit out of it. But here, as you can see, the first 2 cups I'm going to pour 100%. This is just, when it says 100%, that means this is just solid black ink, nothing else added. And it's Southeast Tattoo Supply. All of this is, except for the white. Make sure you always shake your inks first, especially Greywash, because they will separate. I'm not going to go too crazy. So I'm taking the 100. And I'm going to fill up the first 2 cups, 1 in each row. I don't know if you can see I'm opening my inks with a paper towel. That just keeps shit neat. And when you're filling inks, after you fill them, you want to put them somewhere else. You don't ever want to leave them on the table you're working on, but I'm not actually working on this, so I'm just going to leave them on the table. So 2 cups of solid black. This is 50%, and what that means is there's 50% of this is solid black ink, and then the other 50% is distilled water. Do not ever use tap water for mixing your inks or just to spray on the tattoo. There's also all sorts of shit in tap water that is no good. Use distilled or purified water or intense mixing solution. But just to let you guys know, this is 50% water, 49% distilled water, and actually 1% mixing solution or witch hazel. But just for shits and giggles, I'll say this is 50% solid black ink and then 50% water. Basically it's 50-50. Sorry, making a mess. I'm trying to go fast. These caps drip. Anybody asking where I got these ink bottles? At Walmart. I got a whole bunch of them for like $12. I got like 30 bottles. I'll explain that if I have time. So that was 2 cups of 50, and then this is 25. It's nice to mark your bottles if they all look the same. Again, I'm filling up 2 cups. I'll explain why I do that in a minute. And then, I went from 25, now this is 12.5%, somewhere around there, which means, if you guys haven't figured it out, 12.5% of this bottle is black ink, the rest is water, or whatever you use to mix it down. And again, 2 cups. And then onto this, which is basically half. I'm cutting it down by half every time. That's how I do it. It's not the only way to do it, it's just how I do it. This is 6%. It's actually a little more than 6%, but I mark it as 6, which is a light tone. It's a pretty light tone. And then down to what is 3%. I mark this as 3%. I think this is the 3, which is really watery and it actually foams. Oh, and I fucking, be careful when you're opening it. Sprayed on the wall. Should have done it with a paper towel, like I said. And you can see this is really liquidy. That's a really, 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 really light tone. It's not the lightest. So you see that I have 2 cups of each. And then I'll come in. This is distilled water. This is purified water. Usually I use mixing solution by Intense, but I don't have any here. I'm at home and I forgot to bring that home. I brought this shit home, but not that. Again, 2 cups of that. Usually use mixing solution. You can use witch hazel. You can use glycerin. I prefer mixing solution or distilled water. Don't ever use alcohol. I've seen somebody say mix your inks with alcohol. Never, ever, 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 ever do that. And then 2 cups of white. And my favorite white of all time is made actually by Prism. I got this in a Prism black and gray set to check it out, and the black and gray is actually pretty good too. I just feel my own mixtures a little better. The black and gray kit comes, which I've actually used quite a bit. Comes with actually 3. I'm not going to grab them all out because I'm lazy. 3 different shades of black: lining black, dark black, and medium black or medium gray. And then this white, and I love this white because this white is super thick, so this thing is awesome for highlights, but you can also water it down a little bit, and it's good for mixing colors, and it's, you know, good for mixing in with a little black and gray ink to give a velvety finish. As you can see, I'm not going to fill these cups all the way because it's super thick. This shit's super goopy, so you can make this shit last forever. I'm filling them about 2/3 the way up with white ink. And then the rest of the way with distilled water or mixing solution or whatever you decide to use. Do not use alcohol. Give me a paper towel. Okay, so as you guys can see, I break it down by 50%. I break it down basically by half every time. It goes from 100%, 50, 25, 12, 6, 3, and then basically to nothing, and then pure white. And people are asking, why am I setting up 2 rows? I know people are going to say that's a waste of ink. And it is in a sense, but it also helps with the consistency. When I'm doing a smaller tattoo, I'll make another video on how I set up for a small black and gray tattoo that's not going to use a lot of ink, or, you know, it's a small area, something I can do quickly in one shot. But this is what I'm talking about for bigger pieces and this is what I use for a more realistic black and gray setup. And the reason why I set up 2 rows is when you're doing black and gray shading, you're not just dipping in 1 cup, rinsing in the water, and then going to the next shade to go lighter. Sorry. I also fill up a couple cups of water as rinse cups. I didn't put out. I should do that now. When you're doing black and gray, if you want to go from a solid black area and fade it out to something really light, you're not going to start in the really black ink, tattoo that black area, and then completely clean out your tube and then go to the next, you know, the next lightest color, which is 50%, because then it's going to be blotchy. You won't really have even color fades. You're able to do it, but you're really going to have to whip shade and really seriously overlap. What you want to do is take a little of your dark tone, get the dark in the skin, you know, do it nice and light. That's why you have a tattoo machine that runs fast and light for a Greywash shader. I'll explain that in another video, or if I have time. You go from the dark, you put the dark in, and as long as you have a little black of that really dark black left in the tube, you can't have too much. It all really depends on what you're trying to do, but don't clean the tube out yet. You still have some black in here. It's not all used up. You dip into the next lightest, and what that'll actually do is that's creating an in-between shade that'll be in between, you know, 150. It's basically dipping in between 2 cups, and that there, you know, depending on how long you hold it in each cup, but for shits and giggles we'll say now that's a 75%. So dipping in and out of the cups actually creates even more shades. You're not just limited to what's in the cups. You know, say I wanted something that was about 85%, I dip a little longer in the black opposed to this darker color, you know, than the 50%, which is lighter. So basically, in reality, you can create all different values all over the chart. You can create whatever you want. And being able to do that is really just a learning process, knowing how long to dip in between each cup. You know, if you want to, you know, change it just slightly, you'd run it in one and then just dab in the other if you want it more even. You run it the same amount in both cups. How long you run it in each cup, or if you're running it or just dipping it, it's going to change it. But when you're dipping back and forth between inks to create different shades and different blends, you're muddying up all these inks. You know, if I'm going back and forth like that. Because I dipped in this cup and then went into this cup right here, which should be 50%, is no longer true 50%. It could still be really close. You don't really know. You can't really tell by looking at them what they exactly are. That's where the top row comes in. You don't dip back and forth between the top rows. These are, you know, what I was taught, they're called clean cups. You leave these as solid state. You never dip in this ink and then dip into any of the top inks without rinsing it out. If you want to use any of these top inks, you make sure you completely clean it out, which I'm not going to do. I'm not going to go crazy cleaning this. Before you dip in any of these top row inks, you completely clean out the tube so you're not going to muddy up any of these top cups. This is good for tone matching. You know, say you had like two matching koi fishes, and you colored, basically just colored in all the scales, one tone on one of the tattoos. And then you're going to the other side of the chest, if it was like dual koi fishes or dual skulls, and you want to match that same tone, you could just dip in it. Say you did it with a 25%. If you're dipping in and out of the cups the whole time, this is no longer going to be 25%. That's why you have the top cup. No matter what you do, because you're not dipping this in and out of any other tone, that'll always be 25. You don't have to do it that way. That's just a good way to make sure your tones match. Dipping in and out of cups is extremely important. But like I said, the top row, always leave clean. Don't dip in and out of them. Always clean your tube before you do it. Use the bottoms to dip in and out in mixed tones. And then somebody's going to ask, what's the distilled water for on the end? That's to create an even lighter tone. If this 3% isn't light enough and you want a super light tone, you dip in the 3% and then a little in the distilled water, and that's basically just diluting that 3% even more. And then the purpose of the white cups, when you mix black and white, it doesn't make a lighter shade of black. It'll actually give you a gray. But say you're using, you know, 50% black and you want to give it a more satiny, velvety effect. Instead of be just a lighter shade black, you want to give it a more velvety gray effect. You dip in the 50 and then dip just a tad in the white. And that'll give you, you know, I have to do it a little more. It's hard to see on the paper, but it's actually a more satin effect. It's not a lighter shade of black. It's actually more of a gray tone, you know, which is good for certain aspects. I use that on my black and gray Japanese style. There's also other ways to get that satiny effect, you know, or if you want a solid gray in the area, you know, you can dip in one and then see that cup? It's not a lighter shade of black. It's actually a gray. And also, you don't actually have to set up little cups of distilled water. You could honestly just use your rinse cup or set up an extra rinse cup. But, you know, if you're rinsing out a lot of heavy blacks, that's no longer really going to help you, because after a while, that'll actually be darker than your 3%. You know? So, like I said, dipping in and out of the cups will create different tones. You know, like dipping in these two together, that would be, if it was even, exactly even timing and amount of ink, it'd create a 75%. You know, you dip in between these two, you're going to get an in-between in that. And the same with this, and the same all the way down, dipping in and out of the cups. You know, and you could dip a little longer in this one, and then just a little bit in that one, and you're going to get a tone that's more in that range. You know, I'm not going to go too much into detail on it, because I won't let me load the video. And a tip, when you're cleaning out, you see how I'm rubbing it on the paper towel, always run it backwards. If you run it and go forward like that, you're going to get paper material, the fibers, up in the needle, and that'll actually get deposited in the skin, and it'll make it heal weird, or it'll get infected. So when I rinse and you got water in the tube, usually what I would do, I'm just trying not to make a mess, I'd set up another thick paper towel, and I just shake it. Don't ever blow in your tube with your mouth because you're blowing your saliva right into the tube. I see a lot of artists doing that. If you really want to blow it out, get a can of that aerosol keyboard cleaner and spray it out with that. Shake it is usually what I do, and to make sure it's completely dried out, you run it backwards. Not like this, up and down, just, flat parallel, like that. Never forward, so you don't tear up the paper towel and it gets stuck between the needles. You can barb a needle. Always be careful. And then on to machine-wise, how I set up my machine. Everybody runs their machines differently, so I can't tell you exactly how you could set up your machine. This is just a starting point. This is how I like to do my black and gray, and this is how I prefer it. With black and gray, I like my shaders to run faster and soft. Fast and soft. Fast is just so you get consistent coverage. It prevents it from becoming choppy. And the soft is so you could layer it. And also, upon layering, when you're layering colors, you don't want to tear up the skin. That's why it runs soft. But say you did a whole area and, a really light 3%. It's hard to see that 3% when you put it in, because even if you do it lightly, that blood's going to coagulate and make it look darker. Towards the end of the tattoo, you'll actually see the blood will go away and the actual tattoo will be a little lighter. If it's too light, because you did it with a really soft machine and you do all your black and gray really surfacey, as long as it's not a dark tone, because it's a really light machine, super soft, because you did it really light and surfacey, if it's not dark enough, you actually have at least one more chance to go over it and darken it up. Depending on how feathery you do it and how light your machine is, sometimes you have 3 chances in one spot, opposed to a color packer, which is pretty much 1 chance and you're done, sometimes 2. If you're using a light Greywash shader that runs fast and soft, you're almost, as long as you do it correctly, or at least how I do it, and depending on the skin type. Some skin types you only got 1 pass no matter what, but most skin types, if you have a setup like this, you can get at least 2 passes, without tearing the skin up. Sometimes 3, and I've actually been able to hit a spot 4 times without tearing it up. All depends on the skin type and the machine. This machine, the specs on this machine, as it sits right now, it's around 106 cycles per second, 53 duty. It's fast, like a liner, almost in the liner category, not as fast as I would line, but it's super soft. It's a cutback liner too. It's got a 1-piece 20 gauge spring. It's basically set up like a liner. A little less tension in the back. I couldn't tell you, I do it all by feel. But a bigger gap than you would use in the liner. I could easily turn this into a liner just by, twisting the contact screw and shortening up the gap. This is basically a liner with a nickel gap. See how it's super soft. Also, another tip for black and gray is the type of needle. If you want to get smoother blends and smoother edges, use what is called a curved magnum. I don't know how well you can see the needle, but it's actually rounded. It's not a flat needle. The whole needle is curved. It curves like this. Basically, what that does is that enables you to fade out the edges a little more. Also, when you're doing hair, if you're tattooing realistic hair, you can fade lines in and out. Instead of a hard line, a hard ending, instead of really having to feather those lines, it's easier to feather out a line with this. If you're doing line work with the shader sideways, you could really make that line fade out into nothing. I'm not going to get into that. But my preferred needle size for pretty much all my black and gray, I'll set up another needle size for like details. It's usually a 7 mag, but for 90% of the black and gray tattoo, or 90% of all the black and gray tattoos I do, I use a 15 curved magnum. It has 8 needles on the bottom, 7 on the top, and it's curved. And as you can see, I have a lot of that needle tip sticking out. You can see how much of that needle's sticking out. Now, you don't have to do it like that because it takes a lot more control to get consistent coverage. But the reason why I do that is with black and gray, I'm like to be a little more precise, but it's more pain relief. I'm not sticking that whole stroke in because this machine would never push all that needle in. But it sticks out that much. The same, purpose you would hang a liner needle is just so you can see it. You're a lot more precise if you can actually see the needles. And it's less traumatic to the skin opposed to running off the tube and actually running the bottom of that tube against the person's skin the whole time, or to chafe an area that you just tattooed as you're going over it. So basically, I think of it as a paintbrush. You're really going in surfacey. That's not even tearing up my glove. A color packer would tear right through my glove. I'm not even able to get through the glove. As you can see, I'm bogging out the machine. Different needle sizes are going to need to run on different powers. So I can't tell you what volt to run your shit on. It really depends on your entire setup, not just what size armature bar you have, what springs, what coils. It depends the geometry of the frame, the spring, the armature bar, the coils, and the size needle you have, how much tension's on the rubber band. There's so many different variables when it comes, to a tattoo machine give and such, that I can't tell you what to run your machines at. If you have this exact setup with this exact needle and tube and this rubber band, I run this at 7 to 8 volts. Right now it's at 7.8 volts, and it runs like this. But no one's going to have this exact machine. They might have the same frame, but nobody's got that spring or armature bar. I custom cut out that armature bar to make it light, and I hand cut that spring out of feeler gauges. And it changed out the capacitor. So hopefully that helped you guys. Like I said, use a machine that runs a little faster. It doesn't have to be as fast as mine, but the faster it runs, you're going to get a more even fade when you're fading out, and you're not going to have to go extremely slow. And the slower you go, the more time you spend in one area. The more time you spend in one area, the more trauma it's going to pull or do to the skin. So running quick and light is usually the way to go with black and gray. Now, given you don't even have to have any give on your machine to do black and gray. There's people out there that do amazing black and gray with, like Cheyenne Thunders and Hawks, which actually have zero give to them. It's really all about your control. This basically just prevents you from oversaturating it and over tearing up the skin. You could do it with a machine that runs hard as hell. You just got to be really careful, and you really got to feather those needles, and it just makes a little more work on you. That's why I prefer coils. This is a big machine. I'd rather use a lighter one, but just the way it runs is why I prefer it. And then again, people have been asking this question all the time: what is my most used machine? And it would definitely be this. This is my favorite Greywash shader of all time. It just runs amazing. It's perfect to my style. I got it for damn near nothing. It's a next generation Orion. And I use this more than anything. It's not as heavy as people say it is. It's really only around 7.8 ounces, which is heavy, but it's not extremely heavy. But I'd have to say it's my favorite tattoo machine just because I use it more than any other. And that's pretty much it, guys. I knew I was going to tell you something else, but I know I'm going to completely forget. So that's really basically it. That's how you set up black and gray. If you have any questions, if I left anything out, please let me know. And if you guys disagree with it, please voice your opinion. You can tell me all you want. I'm not going to disagree with you. I'm not going to hate on you for it. Everybody has their own way of doing stuff. But for me, setting up for a bigger tattoo or a two-part tattoo, this is how I would set it up. I'll also make another video going more into depth how I set up the machine and how the give works and how to create that certain give. And also how I would set up for a really small tattoo and how I actually went about mixing the inks down. It doesn't have to be an exact science. This probably isn't exactly 50-50, but